Yo, um, my name is Mr. Clean Ate My Wife. Famous Dark Souls and Elden Ring PvPer. but um, but all jokes aside, I've been playing Dark Souls and the series for a long time. Got into Dark Souls 1, and I got absolutely hooked. And I never played Dark Souls 2, but I've gone in, I get really into all the lore, so I've watched, basically people play through the entire game and massive lore breakthroughs and all sorts of things. So I know the story pretty well. I just kind of wanted to give my little, I know Dark Souls lore. What is this fucking 2015? But um, I don't know. I wanted to. I've been thinking about this recently the past 2 days, and I kind of got this really good understanding and wording of it almost. I want to talk about it. So ultimately, Dark Souls is, everyone gets very, very hooked on Dark Souls lore, and a lot of people don't really understand why. You know what I mean? Like, there's very few games that people keep talking about it, like fucking 12 years after it comes out, just to break down the story and still don't understand it. And a big part of that is the design of the games, where they sort of leave a certain level up to interpretation and leave gaps while there is a central story. And that's what's so cool about it, is it's trying to figure out what actually happened with the clues and just not being given all the information. Um, but I think the big reason why Dark Souls hits so hard is because it's very much, it's an allegory. It's an allegory for so many things, um, basically for life in general, and it breaks down all of these things about not only life but like modern life almost. And I'm not going to get into the full basically, the full analysis of how everything links up, but I want to focus in on one, aspect, which is the whole Gwyn in the Age of Fire, and the contrast between the dark and the light soul, kind of what they represent, and what the whole like course of the world and how everything unfolds kind of means, what it represents, and the reasonings behind everything. Almost, that's the reasonings, and more the allegory that it generates. um Doing this with no script, so forgive me. May edit some shit out, may not. May just leave this shit the fuck in, because who cares? I do a little bit, but But so anyway, the way that I kind of think of the light and the dark soul, I'm not even talking about the life and death soul. Those are a little bit, I think, more simple. But the light and the dark soul, light is kind of equated to fire, and dark is equated to the abyss a lot. But I think those are more kind of the manifestations, like the extremes of these two, which it's been pushed to these extremes by the people by Gwyn ultimately. Um, and the way that I rationalize it, right, is so light is fire, right, and so it's like it burns, and it kind of requires fuel, and then it generates heat, which is life, and so it's like burning away, what I mean, what's already there in order to generate power and light and almost civilization. I almost think of it as like a society. It's like you have like a big like forest or whatever, and then you burn down a huge chunk, and so you have a massive clearing, and then you can build a city in it. Almost, that's kind of what fire is. And then that leads to advancement, and that leads to whatever. And it's almost, it represents like the ego, in a sense. It's like your conscious mind, like, I'm gonna burn this forest down, and I'm gonna build my empire, and I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna whatever, and I'm gonna make it this amazing place, and light and love and whatever. And it's this whole like boom. Whereas the dark is like, as the civilization fades, right, and as it kind of crumbles, it's like the forest that sort of grows in and sort of starts to like, it's like it's the mushrooms that break everything down and put it back into the soil, and kind of leads to just a natural kind of uncontrolled, just like rise of just life and nature that comes back afterwards, right? And that's the healthy sense of dark. It's almost like it's like decay and then rebirth from that decay, which is kind of like rot in Elden Ring. I think they kind of they took some of that, and it gets equated to rot in the Ashes of Iron Dale DLC too, because it's sort of like the painted world is like a mirror. You know what I mean? Where it's almost the opposite, where things are decaying too much and it needs to be burned because it's time to make way for new civilization, whereas the light is needed. And that kind of shows you when dark starts to get too far. But they're repressing that and want to stay in that. But yeah, but dark is kind of like, it's like the subconscious, and it's like kind of more your darker, more like natural instincts and tendencies, and like the dark side of humanity, the dark side of people. Everyone has their kind of dark side. They're sort of like more like selfish, kind of primal urges, you know what I mean? And that's almost what the dark represents. But the thing is when those are, that is a part of you, and it's really important to integrate that in a healthy way instead of trying to repress it and conquer it. And Dark Souls is almost an allegory for what happens when you try to repress that fully, and then how everything just slowly starts to get terrible. And the dark, he doesn't repress the dark. What happens is the dark gets twisted, and when it gets repressed too much, just like when you repress anything, it starts to, like, the pressure builds up, and then it comes out in different ways. But the way it's coming out is twisted and like not good, because it's been repressed and because it's been pushed down. So it's not a healthy expression. It's an unhealthy, uncontrolled expression, but something that's not fully understood and is being actively quashed. But it's a part of the world, so you can't do that, right? And that kind of allegory is that's something that a lot of people, kind of need to learn. And I think that, a lot of people don't consciously understand that, but it's in the themes, and that's why it hits people so hard. But the way that the whole dark sign and the curse actually went about, is first off, they had the when they were fighting the dragons, and they had the pygmies and the ring knights, and they were all working together. The ring knights were very much, they took the dark, and they were very self-aware about it, and they used it. And like one thing you'll notice, like in their armor and their weapon descriptions, is it's like they have a level of like almost sentience and like emotion to them, which is also interesting that you notice in like all of the dark sorceries and all of the dark pyromancies. It all involves taking the flame or the magic or whatever and imbuing it almost with an emotion and like giving it sentience. And it's like that is what dark is. It's like subconscious emotion and sentience. And when you think about it almost too, it's like you have your mind, which is, it's created by electrical impulses, and it's like your brain's almost a CPU, and it takes things, and whatever, this logic generates this thing, from burning fuel. But then you have, your emotions, which is more generated just from like the micro, like your entire, like all the microscopic organisms going through your body. You know what I mean? Like in your stomach, like your emotions are created by hormones that are like released by organisms in your stomach. And like when you eat more of one food, the organisms that break down that food will have more nutrients, and they'll proliferate more. That's the word, right? And then when there's more of that organism, it'll actually generate more of those hormones, and it will affect your mood. So it's like, that's almost what humans in the dark represents in this sense, and so that, that kind of sentience, and the fact that that's just ever growing in the background, and as he's at the peak of his power, so as it fades, that's just gonna become more dominant. That freaks him the hell out, because Gwyn's also kind of, Gwyn in the Age of Fire is very similar to like civilization, like modern civilization, and like, the millionaires and the people who are in power. And it's like this civilization where people are kind of not in their because people don't live in their natural state. We're not meant to go to work 9 to 5 and live in tiny little houses and whatever. Like we're meant to be in the forest, like fucking hunting and gathering and doing all that. Like that's our natural state. But being in society and being slightly repressing some of that to fit into this overarching thing, it's given us a certain level of safety. It's given us, right, insane technological advancements, and it gives the people on top insane amounts of power and comfort, right? And it's the same thing with the people who are on top benefiting from that system. They don't want to address this, and so a lot of the time they'll kind of repress it more on, at like the expense of the people on the bottom in order to keep themselves in power. And that's kind of what Gwyn is doing in this sense, right? And so he takes this threat from the Ring Knights and he puts like, oh, a ring of fire, it's the, help you, whatever, comes up with some bullshit excuse in order to repress that and control it with the fire. And then this, that was almost like the test run for when the fire was fading, and he put it on the Dark Soul itself, right? Because what it is it's a ring of fire that, surrounds the humanity. When the humanity starts to grow, it fuels the fire. And so he makes it so that the Dark Soul itself is the fuel for the fire. So as it creeps, the fire just burns it off. You know what I mean? And I think the reason why this results in the undead curse and people being reborn and slowly hollowing is because, normally, again, dark is the cycle of death and rebirth, breaking down decaying things and new life bursting from it, And so normally the humanity, would be released and it would go back out and it would recycle and it would, settle and either grow new humans or, however that would manifest in this world. But because it's been linked to the fire and set in this like system of slowly burning it off, instead of being repurposed, it burns, and then the person is kind of reignited with the flame every single time in this perpetual cycle. They just slowly get more and more and more drained. Where both of them are getting drained by this like the fire is slowly getting weaker and weaker and weaker, and the Dark Soul is slowly getting weaker and weaker and more twisted, right? And then Dark Souls 3 is what happens when this cycle of just destroying each other constantly instead of kind of being in a harmonious oscillating state, which the painted world is in that state. It's like there's almost more contrast where the outside world is what happens when it's an unhealthy, like linked, constant destroying each other to perpetuate one thing, whereas the other is we burn it, we have a new painting, we chill for a while, things slowly start to decay, we burn it down, something new comes from it, slowly starts to decay, we chill for a while, we burn it down, something new comes from it, right? And that's kind of the cycle that like the world was supposed to follow, but it's been twisted. And yeah, that's, I don't know, that's the, it's what happens at the end of the day. It's all a massive allegory for what happens when you try to suppress the darker aspects of life instead of accepting them and working with them, which I think a lot of people kind of miss but understand intuitively. You know what I mean? And I don't know, I just wanted to vocalize this because I think it's kind of a cool way to look at it. And I have a feeling that a lot of this was kind of in the back of Miyazaki's mind when he was designing shit. That's all for me. Keep your wives away from me. I'm feeling a little hungry.